Well, UFC FUEL TV 8 is in the record books. Surprisingly, it was a mediocre card at best, up until the Pride mainstays hit the octagon. You could argue that it was a Pride FC sweep against the UFC fighters, but those arguments are so 2008. You see, I wasn't really looking at Wanderlei Silva, Hunt, or even Gomi, who's my personal favorite fighter. I was looking at Japanese fighters that were on the undercard, and I saw the problem with JMMA as a whole on this card. As of March 5, 2013, nearly 6 years after the Pride buyout, there are very few superstars that Japan has produced since that time. Like it or not, Shinya Aoki is the face of Japanese mixed martial arts. He even went as far as to fight stateside, something that until recently, Japanese fighters are just unwilling to do. However, big fights in America like Gilbert Melendez and Eddie Alvarez II resulted in poor performances from him. The curse that seems to plague Japanese fighters, and thus their local organizations, is that once they have a fighter that's up and coming or developing into their own, they lose. And they lose to people that have nothing significant to do after beating them. Here's a list of just a few people. Satoru Kitaoka was on the rise in 2008. After beating Carlos Condit and Paul Daly at welterweight, he ran through the Sengoku lightweight Grand Prix like a hot knife through butter, even finishing Takanori Gomi in the first round. In his first defense, he lost the belt to Mizuto Hirota. You may know him as the guy who got his arm broken by Shinya Aoki, which was a fight that led him to vacate the title, thus neutralizing the Sengoku lightweight division. Speaking of which, Shinya Aoki, who has been the face of Dream, really, who else do you think about when you think about that organization? Things are going well for Shinya at first, but the stateside trip facing Melendez and Strikeforce and that cowardly performance, which should have been just a friendly exposition fight between him and the kickboxer Gianatsu Nakashima that left him knocked out, and given those circumstances in the worst way. Since then, he has, and his perception has not been the same. Last but not least, Satoshi Ishii, a 2008 judo gold medalist who was the hot prospect of the global MMA market back at that time, which Sengoku somehow won the battle when acquiring him, beating out both Dream and the UFC. His supposed cakewalk debut against his 8-year-older version of himself and an out-of-shape Hideo Yoshida was a disaster that ended with Ishii losing and Yoshida retiring soon afterwards. 2 years later, it would happen again where he would face Fedor, who retired not long after defeating Ishii. I bring up that topic of diverse training because the vast majority of Japanese fighters do not want to send other fighters from different countries into Japan, or they don't want to go out of Japan themselves, or even try to emulate another country's fighting style. That has led to a cap of potential. If there's one pocket of Japanese mixed martial arts where this is most profound about being the best in one given aspect, it's probably the women's division. Outside of Megumi Fuji and Rin Nakai, the bantamweight fighter, are the only standouts to come out of the country. Fuji retired recently, and Pancrase is suspected of fixing fights from Nakai with special rule changes. A good chunk of records that are not Fuji or Nakai looks like to be hovering around the 50-50 mark. Records like 6-8, 10-9, 8-13 really fills up the vast majority of the women fighters in Japan fighting in MMA today. I mean, I would quit if I had a record like that, but the niche of women combat sports have its demands, I suppose. It's strange because the organizations seem to parallel men's MMA in some respects. A lot of rebranding. Remix became Smack Girl, which most of the events were held between 2003 to 2006, just like Pride had them, suggesting that there's a cultural difference within Japan itself regarding to their desire to see mixed martial arts. Smack Girl had a relationship with Deep as K1 Heroes and Pride did, and later, along with Deep, rebranded itself again to make Jewels. Right now, as we all know, Ronda Rousey is a girl to beat, and few want to fight her in 2013. We'll see the extent of Ronda's power to push not only herself, but the entire division. Dream has broken to ONE FC, and there are rumors that they'll be running more shows this year. If they did, how would they market it? If they did, would it be better? And more importantly, if they did, would you watch it? Okay, well, there's a little bit of an asterisk that I would like to talk about before I conclude all of this. And the first thing I would like to talk about is the mysticism and pageantry of mixed martial arts, or actually martial arts in general. You know, a lot of people today know of Anderson Silva and Lyoto Machida, and they also know about their connections to Steven Seagal, someone who's made a couple of, well, wild claims in a lot of people's eyes about, you know, inventing a front kick, things of that nature. But when I think about this, when I think about all the research I've done making this set of videos, I look at martial arts. I'm talking about great martial artists, and there's always an aura of, for lack of a better term, bullshit. You know, you take someone like Muhammad Ali, one of the most famous boxers of all time. He claimed to, you know, train underwater and work his jabs underwater to feel all the water pressure to make him a faster boxer. He did all that mainly just to get into Time magazine. You think about someone like Kimura, the man who defeated Helio Gracie in Brazil. First off, he became a professional wrestler right after doing so, but he also claimed to do 1,000 push-ups every day and do different judo techniques 1,000 times, like 6 or 7 different judo techniques 1,000 times every single day. And when I think about martial arts, and I'm talking about whatever martial arts it is, it's all about optimization and efficiency. So I don't see why 1,000 would actually be something that any martial artist would like to do. I call BS on that as well. Rickson Gracie, 400-0 in jiu-jitsu. That's such a nice even round number. You have to wonder who was he fighting, because he did decline fights with Ishmael and Sakuraba later on in his career. So I think when it comes to martial artists, and you know, you see this more in boxers when they believe their own hype, but for martial artists in general, like, you know, with the Eastern martial arts, it seems to be a little more crazy. You know, the thing is this: when the MMA started, what we think of MMA is, it started like right after World War II in Japan. And when you're thinking about that, you're thinking about Kimura needed to do something to make money, okay? He needed to do something. He went to the pro wrestling aspect. Now, pro wrestling is all about pageantry. And when we look at something like Pride FC, it's a lot of pageantry. There's a lot of legitimate fighters, but there's a lot of pageantry to this. And so when I see something like the UFC today, and you know, they've had a number of roster cuts very recently, and there's also the welterweight title contentionship going on for UFC 158 that's coming up very soon, with Nick Diaz, someone who lost his last fight and was suspended for smoking marijuana. Now, you can have your own feelings about whether or not he lost, or, you know, should marijuana be legal. That's neither here or there. The main thing is he lost and he was suspended, and then he was granted immediately a title shot, because the UFC needs a little more pageantry to their events. They've lost, well, not they've lost, but they've cut a large number of fighters with plans to cut more. And so the thing is that now you're having a situation where the martial arts side is getting almost as even as the pageantry side, much like Pride FC was. Because the thing is that the thing is this: no fighting organization, whether it be in the States, Japan, anywhere, they're not introducing anything new. Fighting is as bare bones as reproduction and putting food in your mouth. So you're not introducing anything new. So I think with the pageantry aspect of martial arts, there's going to be seen on the TV, because as this sport becomes more mainstream, you're going to have to appeal to more mainstream people. So I think that when we're talking about like martial arts, like someone like Steven Seagal, going back to that, we say, oh, he's full of shit, but he may come from that old school way of thinking of himself as a martial artist, like having this sort of like aura or chi about him, or some sort of connection to spirituality that gives him fighting abilities. You know, we think about someone like a Bruce Lee, who, you know, for all intents and purposes, learned a number of these moves and mastered them for the anesthetic appeal of it in cinema. You know, because Bruce Lee was an actor as a child, and he knew, you know, he was exposed to that industry at a very, very young age, and of course also in martial arts. But the thing is, if you want to be the absolute greatest fighter in the world, you probably want to learn a little bit more judo and jiu-jitsu rather than Wing Chun, which is actually kind of limited in what you can do in street fighting because of just the linearity of how they fight. That's a whole different subject. In World War II in Japan, the Emperor Hirohito was studying a certain kind of jellyfish, and this jellyfish had the ability to, still does, has the ability to get to a certain age, and once it gets too old, it will like regenerate itself into like almost like a newborn baby. As long as nothing kills it or nothing damages it physically, it can keep doing this. It will lose all of its memory and it lose all of its abilities and just be like a new person in an old body. If you kind of understand that, please look that stuff up. It's very interesting. We still have no idea how this works. What I would like to see sometime in my lifetime is that the Japanese mixed martial arts organizations find a way to get the DNA out of the jellyfish so they can regenerate itself and apply that culturally speaking to their mixed martial arts organizations over there. Thank you for watching this. Here's my love letter to Japanese mixed martial arts. Take care.